making sure that this works.
Did you turn the picture mute off?
I thought I pressed the button.
Try again. There you go.
Good. Great. All right. So, Halloween is on the horizon, and children will soon be dressing up in costumes inspired by fantasy and folklore and infamous killers. The children aren't scary, but the costumes that they adorn would be terrifying to meet face to face in person. Thankfully for us, monsters and creatures like Cthulhu, Frankenstein, zombies, and vampires, they don't exist. But some of these costumes are based off of mysteries that went unsolved and are still open-ended. Insidious killers like these roam the streets to this very day, and we just don't know who they are. Unfortunately for us, this is the best time of the year to share stories about scary monsters and spooky killers, but unfortunately for us, we can't have a fire in this room, but we could turn off the lights. Today, I want to present to you the known details, the mysterious elements, and some of the open ends in these murder mysteries. Pictured here is the infamous Jack the Ripper, a famous cartoon villain and a real mystery from old London times. He was a killer in the alleyways of London in 1888, and he was active for only a couple of months, canonically, but there's been many letters saying, "Oh, I was Jack the Ripper," and there's been many claims made that there's many Jack the Rippers. So first off, let's start with, why is he named Jack the Ripper? Well, Jack the Ripper is famous for using a knife. He's a very brutal killer. He's killed 5 women confirmed by the police, and all of them had their guts torn out. Some of them had organs ripped out and delivered to police stations or other areas in boxes, along with letters claiming that it was from him. The second possible reason is that it's a play on the word, or the acronym Rest in Peace being RIP, so he's Jack the Ripper. But the first time that we ever heard him called Jack the Ripper is in a letter that he submitted himself to the Central News Agency. It was called the Dear Boss letter, and it referenced a boss of some kind, unnamed, and that he would clip the lady's ear off. One day later, his third victim, Catherine Eddowes, one of these 5 poor young ladies, was found dead in the streets with, namely, an ear cut off. Jack seemed to target prostitutes and young women in rural areas or alleyways, and there were only 5 confirmed kills from August 1888 and November 1888 that were confirmed by the police to be by him. After the Dear Boss letter was another postcard sent to the same Central News Agency of the area. This one was called the Saucy Jackie letter. And the final letter that he submitted was called the From Hell letter. And this is a bit of a mystery and pretty ominous. I have a picture here. In the letter, it talks about how it was delivered, in the book Zodiac by Robert Graysmith, published in 1986, there was a record of a letter being delivered to the Whitechapel Vigilance Church to George Lusk, a priest of this committee of the church, and along with the letter was submitted a box containing a kidney being preserved in spirits of wine detailed in the letter. The other half of the kidney was eaten, apparently, according to the letter, and that it tasted nice. I can't imagine that it was, though. In addition to these letters, as the news got word of these creepy stories and creepy letters, hundreds more letters filled in the mailboxes of the news agency, claiming that they were all Jack the Ripper, but there were only 4 that were canonical. Our second killer that we're going to be investigating is a little more recent, as anyone from this area has already passed away and the investigation is closed. But this one remains open, namely in Napa County, and this one you've probably heard of. He is known as the Zodiac Killer. He was famous for many more killings than Jack the Ripper, totaling up to 37, and being operating in the 1960s to the early 1970s. He submitted letters to local authorities as well as the Jack the Ripper, but his were a little different. He submitted codes, ciphers, cryptographic messages that contained messages hidden inside, and only one was cracked during his investigation. The letter, the cracked letter was, the letter's code was revealed in the Public Radio International in 2011. Their archives state that the message had claimed that the dangerous man was more fun to hunt than any animal in the wild, and that he was killing to enslave people in their afterlife. There was only one suspect for this, and that was generated from this garbled, unintelligible code at the end of this message that was supposedly cracked. This man was Arthur Leigh Allen, and he had a friend who snitched on him to the police station, saying that there was a conversation had about him having a desire to kill people, wanting to attach a flashlight to a firearm, and him using the name Zodiac for himself. Unfortunately, this guy wasn't the suspect. There was an expert analyst of handwriting commissioned by the police force, and he said that there was no match in DNA, there was no match in handwriting, and that there was no possible way that there could be conclusive evidence that Arthur Leigh Allen was the Zodiac Killer. Interestingly enough, he has nothing to do with the horoscopal zodiac signs. In depictions of him by victims that were assaulted by him and survived, he was wearing a Zodiac Swiss watch. The Zodiac Swiss watch company has a logo that looks like this, similar to symbols that showed up on some of the letters that he submitted and near the crime scenes. It also looks a bit like a gun scope, and as we've seen before, he has a preference for firearms, and some were stabbed. So, these killers are pretty scary, but they make for pretty good Halloween costumes, and I encourage you all to have fun tomorrow while you're trick-or-treating, but do be mindful. There might be a killer lurking around the corner.
Yeah. Well, I'm not, that's gonna be, that's not rather than to do that. I'd rather just do my sister's job.
So Allie, what did you think?
So I'm super into like Criminal Minds episodes and Law and Order and stuff like that, so I've got a good mentality of what you're talking about. But I was a little confused on your intro. I thought you were going to talk about Halloween, which we've already heard too about, but then you went into murder mysteries that haven't been solved, and that was kind of interesting. I didn't really hear a preview. I don't know if you did make a preview or not, but you kind of just jumped right into who Jack the Ripper was and what he did to his victims and what his letters were. And then you also jumped into the Zodiac and how he wrote letters and what he did to his victims. I thought that was really interesting. You talked really well to the audience. You had a good flow with what you were talking about. Your visuals were good to look at. And I thought your topic, murder mysteries, was a very good idea. Some things you could have done better on was your conclusion was a little late. You went over time a little bit. Maybe next time try to wrap it up a little sooner. And you did pause a couple times throughout your speech. So maybe just try to, while you're trying to think of something else, just continue talking, and it might help you stop the pausing. But other than that, I thought it was a good speech. So.
All right. Yeah, the reference to Halloween was okay, but I do think it is a little bit confusing, and I'm not exactly sure anybody would know how to dress as either Jack the Ripper or the Zodiac. So I'm not sure those make good costumes, and as a consequence, it feels like that's an awkward tie-in. There is a little bit of suspense, though, in the way you set up the topic, which I appreciated. And I like the reveal of the topic. That's okay. Your goal was pretty clearly stated. I'm going to agree with Allie. I didn't really get much of a preview. If I was reverse engineering the presentation, what I think you might want to do is kind of talk about the parallels between two famous unsolved serial killers, because we have one from the 19th century and one from the 20th century that had a lot of similarities between them. Both of them sent letters to the authorities. Neither of them was ever caught. You had multiple, now you never talked about this for either, you actually said there was only one suspect in the Zodiac. I think you're going to discover when you do more research that that's not accurate, because there are several people that have been suggested as potential suspects. But I think that there's a point where you could say there were multiple suspects, but none of them all of them were weakened as suspects by one thing or another. Like Arthur Lee Allen gets discounted because the handwriting analyst, that kind of thing. There's no similarity there. Or some of the, there are people who are still trying to solve the Jack the Ripper crimes. People write books about it, they investigate it. There are organizations that are devoted to doing that very kind of thing. And every time I turn around, I swear there's somebody who says, we've got it solved, here's the answer. And then there's a new book 2 years later, nope, here's the real answer, that kind of thing. So I think the idea that these things fascinate us and continue to draw us in because they are unsolved, because they were notorious, because they had certain similar characteristics, that's the way I think you could go at this speech. Instead of making it a more generic kind of thing, talk about these two particular cases and make that the focus of the speech. As it is, that's really kind of what the structure of the speech is, although Jack the Ripper takes up the first 5 minutes and Zodiac is, kind of crammed into a shorter period of time at the end, even though the Zodiac's more recent and there's a lot more information that's going on. And my guess would be people would have more passing familiarity with that, since it is a more recent event. Nobody here except me, I think, will have been around, lived through those times, that kind of thing. Because I remember, I was 12 when that was all happening, and scared the crap out of everybody in California when it was happening. It was just like, holy criminy, what the hell is going on? So I have a little bit of a memory of those kinds of things, and I like that. I like the subject. Like I said, I think it needs to be the focus needs to change. Now, one of the things that happens in your presentation is you've got a lot of information, and sometimes I think you forget why you're sharing that information and what point it is you're trying to make with it. And then sometimes you get distracted by the information instead of sticking with your theme. And as a consequence, the speech ends up feeling a little bit, I don't know, choppy. I'm not sure. It doesn't come together quite as well as it needs to. It needs to have a little bit more flow to it, and it needs to, like I said, I think if you reverse engineered it and you did these two parallel cases, that you could just say, well, let's go with this track for a second and see how similar it is to this track. Now, here's the reason that we're looking at this piece of information, and it's similar to what we had over here, so that things would fit together a little bit more, and we could tell why we're listening to this. You also need to, practice a little bit. I think you've got ideas that that deserve to be in the speech, but you're not quite clear how to get them into the speech. You haven't thought about transitions. You haven't moved into that part, and you need to do that a lot more. The visuals are okay. The image of Jack the Ripper, since we don't know who Jack the Ripper is, I kept thinking, okay, so where did this picture come from? Who is this drawing that you've got? Is this a particular person that was a suspect? Is this a composite drawing? Or is this just somebody's imagination of what they think Jack the Ripper might have been like? I don't know.
Yeah.
And then we got the wanted posters that you have for the Zodiac, and I'm assuming that those are pictures based on descriptions provided by people who survived attacks, that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of explanation about what's going on there. You mentioned the one suspect, Arthur Lee, and I'm trying to remember his last name all of a sudden. Allen, yeah. Arthur Lee Allen. And, I'm going, well, do we have a picture of Arthur Lee Allen? For instance, that would be something that would kind of fit your story a little bit more as well. And could we compare that, for instance, to the drawings on the wanted posters that you've got that would give us some additional information? So the visuals are okay. I just think that like I said, the content needs to fit together a little bit more. It feels like, well, I got this thing over here that I'm going to talk about, and then I got this thing over here that I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, it bounced around a little too much.
All right. Thank you.